and it should say on your screen that I've started recording. So hello everybody, welcome to Learn Astrology with Mary. Welcome to this webinar, which we're going to be doing about transits. And transits are just a sort of a posh way of saying things that are moving. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to do a little PowerPoint and hopefully you'll be able to see it. And there we go. So let me know if you can't see anything. Hopefully I've shared that. So in this Astro Skype webinar, we're going to be navigating the cosmos and understanding astrological transits. So what's the definition of a transit? A transit is going or conveying or being conveyed across or over or through. That's like goods damaged in transit. Passage or route, the overland transit. Now this is the astrological bit. Apparent passage of a heavenly body across disk of another or meridian of place. And the other word for transit is the transit camp, a camp for temporary accommodation for soldiers and refugees, etc. So the astrological definition is the dynamic movement of planets in relation to our own birth charts. Now I've got a YouTube video demonstrating the moon changing sign. I'm going to click on the link and hopefully everything doesn't disappear on us. And I'm going to move the video forwards. I don't know if you can hear the sound, but what I will do is turn the sound off so we don't end up with some sort of weird thing happening. And let me just see if I can make that bigger, which I probably can't now because my Mac's going to go all stupid on us. But in this video, I have, now why is that not going full screen? The idea, well, the link will be on there, you'll be able to watch it afterwards, but I'm demonstrating there is what happens when I move all the planets forwards, but it isn't going to work. So the link will be in the PowerPoint that I'll send on to you afterwards, but that's just, if you click on that link, you'll be able to watch it and you'll be able to see the planets moving, because unfortunately with astrology, everything's very static, when in reality, everything moves. So if we go back to here, so you don't need much astro knowledge to understand transits. You can imagine them as traffic that's passing your car on the motorway. So the moon and the sun, some traffic will overtake you and speed past you like the moon and the sun. And the moon spends approximately 2 days in each sign. And the sun spends approximately 30 days in each sign. Mercury, Venus and Mars. So other traffic like Mercury, Venus and Mars will take a bit longer to catch up with you and overtake you. And I've included the symbols there for each of those planets. So the one for Mercury is a little cross with a circle and a bit on top, because unless you know a lot of astro language or bits and bobs, it's quite difficult when you're first learning to remember which planet looks like what. But you'll get a copy of this as a PDF afterwards. So Mercury spends approximately 2 to 3 weeks in each sign, unless it's retrograde, and then it can be as long as 10 weeks. So Mercury only retrogrades for 3 weeks at a time, but if the Mercury's already been transiting through a particular sign of the zodiac, it could be that it ends up in that sign for that amount of time. Venus varies from 2 to 3 weeks, unless that's retrograde, and then it can be the longest of 5 months. And Mars spends approximately 6 or 7 weeks in each sign of the zodiac, and the longest it can be is 8 months if that retrogrades as well. And all planets except the sun and the moon can retrograde. So the mid-planets. The mid-planets have a certain amount of time that they spend passing you. So Jupiter spends 1 whole year in each sign of the zodiac. So if you do the maths, it's going to spend 12 years going all the way around the zodiac, because it spends 1 year in each sign, because there's 12 signs of the zodiac. And Saturn spends approximately 2 years in each sign. So if you reach the age of 27, Saturn should have returned and gone back to the sign it was in when you were born. So it takes approximately between 27 and 30 years for it to go all the way around the zodiac. So once you get past the age of 30, you will definitely have had your Saturn return. But we're not doing Saturn return today. Outer planets. So Uranus spends approximately 7 years in each sign. Neptune and Pluto spend much longer in each sign of the zodiac because they're so far away from the sun, which all the planets are orbiting around, apart from the moon, which orbits around our Earth. Neptune spends approximately 14 years in each sign of the zodiac. At the moment, it's in the sign of Pisces, and I'm a Pisces, and I'm enjoying it. I'm not unenjoying it because it's never going to happen again. It's the ruling planets of Pisces, but too much Neptune can make you lose the plot type of thing. Pluto spends approximately 11 to 30 years in each sign of the zodiac. Now, the reason that gap is so big is because of Pluto's orbit. It orbits like the shape of an egg. So consequently, it spends more time in certain signs of the zodiac than others. So that's just to do with its orbit. So we need to remember the timing of planets, because then we can predict how long they'll be doing something to our own natal astro chart. Each planet will have a certain amount of punch depending on our own charts, the sign of the zodiac we are, and how self-reflective and conscious we might be. All the charts I'm showing today are in the public domain. I will be demonstrating easy transits and challenging transits. So ancient astrologers were quite fatalistic about how good or bad transits were, and they were more likely to predict death, wars, or disaster, maybe to cover themselves, so if whatever they predicted happened, then they couldn't be blamed, and if it didn't happen, then no one would be bothered. Modern astrologers use planetary interpretations to empower people, not disempower them. So the question is, how can we work with this energy and get the best from it? So keep in mind the interpretations of each planet. Could you turn your microphone off, whoever it was that just came in, please? Because we can hear you rustling some paper. If you can turn your microphone off, that'd be grand. Thank you. So keep in mind the interpretations of each planet, which will be modified with different signs. So the sun is how we shine. The moon is the emotions.
Well, if I turn my microphone off, it means I can't hear you.
Really? Okay. Then leave the microphone on, but try not to move around where your microphone is. Mercury is about communication. Venus is about love. Mars is about action, aggression, and energy. Jupiter is luck, learning, and teaching. Saturn is responsibility. Uranus is freedom. Neptune is higher consciousness, and Pluto's all about deep change and transformation. Now we're going to be using the astro charts of the singer Amy Winehouse, the astrologer and writer Judy Hall, and a metaphysical writer who you might or might not have heard of, but a guy called Stuart Wilde. Now this is Amy Winehouse's chart. Now you can see that red line. That's the way that the planets go round a chart. So when you make, pardon? When you make your chart, if you imagine in it, the planets that are on the outside are going to go around counterclockwise. So I've put the arrow there just to remind you that when you're looking at a transit chart, because nothing's static and it's all going to move, you need to imagine in your mind it's going to shift counterclockwise, they say in the US, or anti-clockwise, they say in the UK. So this is the natal chart for Amy Winehouse. She was born on the 14th of September 1983 at 10:25 p.m. in Enfield in UK near London. She's got a Gemini ascendant, so you'll see what the ascendant is where you see the initials AC. Her sun sign was 21 degrees Virgo, and you'll see that in the house number 4. The symbol for the sun is a circle with a dot in the centre. She's got a very one-sided chart. If you ignore Chiron in her 12th house, she's got what's called a bundled chart. And her moon is in the sign of Capricorn, and it's conjunct to Neptune. Keep that in mind. So we're going to do a timeline for Amy Winehouse. So she's born on the 14th of September 1983. I've just put some key points of what happened in her life and when she did things. When we're going to look at certain charts, we're not looking at the very, very early ones, but if you're curious, you can create her chart on astro.com and you could go back to those other dates. But we're going to be looking at the dates that her albums were released, when she got married, and what led up to her death of alcohol poisoning. So this is the date of her first album. Remember, of course, that she's born in 1983. We're now 2003 and she's only 20 years old. And her first debut album, called Frank, was released on the 20th of October 2003. Produced mainly by Salam Remin, many songs were influenced by jazz, and apart from 2 covers, Amy co-wrote every song. The album received critical acclaim, with compliments given to the cool, critical gaze in its lyrics. And Amy's voice was compared with those of Sarah Vaughan and Macy Gray, among others. Now that's her natal chart there in the centre. In the blue rim on the outside, that's where the planets were on that date that I've entered into the computer, the 20th of October 2003. And you'll see at the bottom in house number 4, her sun sign, so that's her natal planets. But in the rim on the outside, you'll see a symbol for the planet called Jupiter, which looks like the number 4. And Jupiter's the lucky planet. So it's what old astrologers called a benefic planet, because it brings us joy and happiness and learning. So the release of her first album, because she released it on the 20th of October, but it was the following year that, sorry, no, that's the next one, beg your pardon, but she released it in 2003, but that was a good time to do it because Jupiter is now transiting through the sign of Virgo. And on that particular date, if you look on the right hand side, you'll see the P for Pluto. So the way astro.com does planets, they use the symbol for Pluto, which is a P, looks like the initial P, but some computer programs will make, it depends what computer program you use, by the way, but quite a lot of them will use the symbol for Pluto is a stick with a circle at the top and then another little bit going over the top of that. So it looks a little bit like Mercury, but on astro.com, they use the symbol for Pluto. It looks like the letter P. And you'll see that P is in the sign of Sagittarius and has now entered her 7th house of close relationships and marriage. Now keep that in mind. That's not important to what happens at this moment in time, but I want you to watch as we go on what happens with that Pluto. Now, on the date that the album's released, the sun is now in the same sign as her natal Pluto. So her natal Pluto is in her 5th house. So the houses are all numbered counterclockwise. You'll see the P for Pluto. And then the outside rim, which is the transits, the sun and Mercury are what we call conjunct, right next door to her natal Pluto. Now, because her chart starts in Gemini, the ruling planet, the one that looks after her, is Mercury, and her Mercury's in the 4th house. So this is a person with Sun in the 4th house and Mercury in the 4th house. Family is very important for her. Now, I won't go on about her mum and dad. Her parents got divorced when she was 9. Her dad's called Mitch. If you Google it, you won't find very many happy things. He quite enjoyed her becoming famous. He was a cab driver in London. I don't think he quite understood what fame would bring her, because it didn't do her an awful lot of good. Now, the one other planet I want to look at is Neptune, which is up there in the sign of Aquarius, and you can see where the initials are MC. So Neptune isn't a negative or positive planet, but too much Neptune can make you go away with the fairies, especially when it's retrograding. And at that moment in time, it's exactly conjunct to her MC. These are important parts of her chart. Now, this is her best-selling album. So that was 2003. We've now gone 3 years ahead. We're in the year 2006. And the dates for this album being released is the 30th of October. It went #1 in the UK album charts for 2 weeks in January 2007, dropping and then climbing back for several weeks in February. It was the best-selling album in the UK of 2007, selling 1.85 million copies over the course of the year. Time magazine named her song Rehab the best song of 2007, which is a bit sad, really, that the sort of best-selling song that she got was Rehab, because she fell into drug addiction and alcoholism. So it's a bit ironic, really, that the song that made her famous, or helped her become more famous, was that particular. So it's a very good song, by the way, but it's a bit sad. Now, I want you to look at Saturn. So that's the planet of responsibility. That's now started approaching her chart. She's got a one-sided chart. When she was born, her natal Saturn was in the sign of Scorpio in her 5th house. But now she's that bit older. Saturn has just started making transits in her chart. It's bottom of the chart near house number 3 on the outside. Saturn is the planet that looks like a little cross with a curve on it. So when that album was released, the sun is now illuminating her natal Saturn. So if I go back to the previous one, the sun was illuminating her natal Pluto. Now the sun is illuminating her natal Saturn. And these are all things to keep in mind when you're making interpretations for people about whether or not a particular transit is going to be challenging or not. The date that was released, Mercury was retrograde. You'll see Mercury's in the sign of Scorpio. The teeny little R next to it indicates it's retrograde, and it's conjunct to Jupiter. Her natal Jupiter's actually in Sagittarius, I think. Yes. So when that album was released, the Neptune's now stopped retrograding. It's still on MC. The moon's on her MC, and it was a big emotional moment for her because the moon's all about emotions. But now see where Pluto is. It's shifted. So if I go back, Pluto was there. Now you can see Pluto's a little bit further into the sign of Saggy, and it's now conjuncting, being next door to her natal Neptune, and it's not far off her moon. So on the 18th of May 2007, the following year of this best-selling album, she marries a guy called Field as Civil. I don't even know what his first name is, but anyway, he moved from London, from his native Lincolnshire, and he married Amy on the 18th of May 2007 in Miami Beach in Florida. In a June 2007 interview, Winehouse admitted she could sometimes be violent towards him after she'd been drinking, saying, "If he says one thing I don't like, then I'll chin him." In August 2007, they were photographed bloodied and bruised in the streets of London after an alleged fight, although she contended that her injuries were self-inflicted. No comment, don't know whether or not that was the case. Now, this is the date they marry, okay? Now, please get an astrologer to check the date that you get married, because it's quite important that there's certain things that are going to do your chart and the other person's chart some good. So from her point of view, and looking at the transits, the moon and Mercury are now in the sign of Gemini, near to her Gemini ascendant on the left-hand side of the chart there. You'll see the moon and Mercury. So that's quite good, but there's nothing else in her sign other, or in any part of her chart other than Saturn, which is now conjunct to her Mars and her Venus. Okay, so Saturn's at the bottom there in the sign of Leo, coming and approaching her 3rd house of siblings. There's nothing in the sign of Virgo, there's nothing in the sign of Libra, there's nothing in the sign of Scorpio. Jupiter's in the sign of Saggy, which is quite good. That's where it was when she was born, but Jupiter's retrograding and Pluto's now retrograding. So we got some outer planets that aren't being particularly, what's the word I want to look for? They're not being particularly fluffy. And if you look at her MC, you can see Chiron, which isn't always an important asteroid. It's an asteroid, not a planet, but that's exactly conjunct to her MC. So her marrying him didn't do her career any good, as it happens, because MC is how other people see us career-wise. Now we've gone forwards in time, so that's 2007. We're now 2008. She gets various different things wrong with her. She's been in and out of rehab. The major thing, and the reason I've pointed this out, is about the lung issues, because of the Gemini ascendant. Gemini rules the lungs. So Amy began precautionary testing on her lungs and chest on the 25th of October 2008 at the London Clinic for what was reported as a chest infection. She was in and out of the facility and was granted permission to set her own schedule regarding home leave. But she returned to the hospital on the 23rd of November 2008 for reported reaction to the medication that they'd given her. So I thought that was an important date when you've reacted to something. I mean, she's taking non-prescription drugs. She's drinking a lot. She's actually binge drinking, but she goes back to hospital because the medication they've given her has made her feel very strange. Now, if you look and you'll see Saturn, which in that on 2007 was in the sign of Leo, so Saturn's the one that's shaped like the cross with the squiggle on. Now Saturn's in the sign of Virgo, and it's exactly conjunct to her sun sign. So were she a client of mine, I'd say, Amy, you need to take your life seriously. Don't do anything frivolous. You need to be looking after yourself. Saturn's now exactly conjunct to her sun sign. So that would be the astrological advice. Of course, I'm not a bloody astrologer, am I? But that would be what an astrologer would be saying to somebody who's got Saturn conjunct their sun sign. You need to take your life seriously. So you need to do things that will benefit you, not work against you. Natally, she has got Sun and Moon square to each other, so she's somebody that would find it more difficult to look after herself. Her knee-jerk reaction would be to help others. It's not a particularly helpful aspect to have, but once you learn the hang of it, once you've learned the hang of it, then you don't do things that are detrimental to your own health. The other transit that was happening then is the Sun, Mars and Mercury are all pretty near to her Jupiter, and that sixth house, the sixth house is about health, and she's got the Sun, Mars and Mercury transiting through her sixth house when natally she has Jupiter and Uranus located there. So the sixth house is how we classify our health and what we think about it. Jupiter makes things busy, and Uranus is about sudden things happening, and this was pretty much a sudden thing that had happened. The other transits, Uranus is right up there in her 10th house, and it's wibbling and wobbling because it's going retrograde, so it's in the sign of Pisces. Neptune's shifted a bit away from her MC, but Chiron is now definitely squished to that. And Pluto, as you'll see, has finished its transit through the sign of Sagittarius. It's now right at the very last degree of Sagittarius, and it's exactly conjunct to her moon, and the moon is how we feel. Now we get to the 18th of June 2011. So this is going forwards a little bit in time. She's been successful, but she's spiraling out of control. She's drinking too much. The crazy things she's getting up to. Her dad's not helping, her mum's not helping. Nobody really knows how to help her. She can't help herself. Her recording company aren't being helpful either. And she was due to go on a 12-leg European tour, and they advised her not to do it because she wasn't very well. And she said she was going to, but she got to Belgrade, and the local media described her performance as a scandal and a disaster. And she was booed off stage due to her apparently being too drunk to perform. So what transits were going on then? There's nothing that's particularly helping her. Again, there's planets in the sign of Gemini, but we can't always rely on planets transiting over our ascendant to help us. The ascendant's how we come into the world, but it's also the sign that we go back to when we're stressed. So when you're stressed, you'll go to your ascendant sign. So even though she's a Virgo, when you're stressed, like in her case, she'll go back to being a Gemini. Let's do lots of different things, and let's go here, and let's do short journeys, and the sun's there shining there, and Venus is there, and it's going to seem all fine for her, but she's too drunk to perform. Now, this is her death chart. So she died at 10 a.m. on the 23rd of July. So this gig was June. This is the following month. Well, the gig, that was going to be a tour. The coroner's inquest reached a verdict of a misadventure. The report released on the 26th of October 2011 explained that Amy's blood alcohol content was 416 milligrams per 100 mils at the time of her death, more than 5 times the legal drink drive limit. According to the coroner, the unintended consequence of so much drink was her sudden and unexpected death. According to her bodyguard, he came in and checked on her a few times in the night. She had been binge drinking. He went into her room at 10 a.m. and said she was fast asleep. But he went back a little while later and she was in exactly the same position that she was in when he thought she was fast asleep. So I've used that as the time that she'd passed because nobody knew that she was alive at that point. But if you look at that ascendant sign, the ascendant sign is 19 degrees Virgo, and her sun sign is that as well. So what I've done now is I've used that death chart and I've superimposed it on the outside of her natal chart, and you'll see the AC for the ascendant at the bottom of this, and it's exactly conjunct her sun sign. I mean, exactly conjunct. The ascendant then was 19 degrees Virgo and she was born at 21 degrees Virgo. So it's only a couple of degrees away. And the MC to that chart is exactly conjunct to her ascendant. So it all went out very, very quickly that she'd been found dead. The same thing with Sinead O'Connor, as it happens. It immediately hit the headlines and what had happened and blah, 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 blah. And so because the MC and Mars of the death chart's exactly conjunct her ascendant of Gemini, it was a public career death. They were writing things in the paper that she now became a member of the 27 Club. Quite a lot of famous pop stars died when they were 27. She hasn't had her Saturn return. If she's managed to live past a Saturn return, probably wouldn't have happened. She needed to grow up. Our Saturn returns are so important for us as individuals. The other thing is Pluto's still near her natal moon in Capricorn. So if you think she's got a one-sided chart, she spent quite a considerable amount of time, in a sense, not listening to what Pluto was telling her, which was about change and transformation. And she was changing and transforming, but not in a healthy way. I'm not blaming her, but that's just what happened. So now I'm going to talk about two other people. So we're going to do Judy Hall and Stuart Wilde. There will be plenty of time for questions afterwards. So both authors that I've met in person and whose books I really enjoyed reading. So we're going to look at the transit dates of when their most successful books were published. Now, you might have heard of Judy Hall if you live in the UK. She lived not far away from me in Somerset. And she was a karmic astrologer and healer, and she was really, really kind. She was a Sagittarius, and she kindly endorsed my Pisces book. And I was talking to a client the other day who was friends with her, and she said that her parents were Pisces and she didn't get on with them. So when I sent her the Pisces book and asked her if she'd review it, she said yes. And she wrote me this lovely, lovely review about it, an endorsement and stuff, because she had, her parents were a nightmare for her because they were water signs and she was a fire sign. And she said, had she read my book, she might have understood her parents a bit more. But anyway, she's a karmic astrologer and healer, and her experience with crystals was based on their intuitive use for healing and enlightenment. She was the author of, actually, it's 27 books on astrology, reincarnation, and crystals. I think since I put that in, I think I've found there was slightly more than 27. But anyway, she was born on the 25th of November 1941 and she died on the 5th of August 2021. It only recently passed over. That's the cover of the book. You might have seen it. If you've been into any mystical shop anywhere, there'll be a copy of that knocking about for sure. Now, this was published on the 1st of May 2003. And there's a little quote there from Judy saying, I wrote the Crystal Bible in response to many requests for an easy-to-use crystal directory which would introduce people to the power of crystals. It was specially designed to help readers identify crystals and their particular properties. I've been reading the reviews of the Crystal Bible with interest because this helps me to plan future books. The Crystal Bible has proved to be a bestseller despite, and this is her in a typical Sagittarius way now saying, despite being virtually continuously out of print. Hamlin, who have now taken over Godsfield Press, assure me that the book will now be available for everyone who orders. Enjoy the blessings of the crystal. But that's a typical Saggy thing to say. She had a Leo ascendant, so she was very friendly and warm. She had Pluto retrograde in the first house. She had Moon in Scorpio in the fourth house, and one of her exes was a Scorpio, but that's not a good, really particularly good combo for a Saggy to date a Scorpio. But anyway. And this is the date that the book was released. Okay, now it wasn't a bestseller on the first day that it was released, but you'll see there's a jolly nice planet that's doing something lovely. What's the nice jolly planet? Jupiter. So Jupiter is now in the sign of Leo, exactly conjunct or not far off her ascendant. She's also having her second Saturn return. So you can see where her natal Saturn is. It's in the 11th house. She was born with Saturn retrograde, but never mind. And Saturn was now back into the sign of Gemini. So this is when we have our second Saturn return, we grow into being the wise elder, ELDER. And that was it. It was a tipping point for her, that particular book. She'd written a number of astrology books, quite a few of which I've read and I've got copies of, but she didn't sort of hit the big time until that particular book came out. And as you'll see, she's also got a one-sided chart. And so that transit, that Jupiter, is now going to go all the way through every house in her chart. Yeah, so it spends a year in each sign of the zodiac. And if you just imagine that little Jupiter there in Leo, it's going to spend a year in Leo and a year in Virgo and a year in Libra and a year in Scorpio and a year in Saggy. And it will give a lot of beneficial energies into her life. And it was a very good book, that one. Now we're going to talk about Stuart Wilde. So he was born in 1946 and lived to be 2013, and he was considered to be a great metaphysical teacher. Most famous New Age New Thought writers and teachers privately studied with him or were greatly influenced by his work. Now, his first book that he wrote, he self-published it, and it's called Miracles. And then he sold the rights to Hay House, which I think he regretted afterwards. But anyway, he moaned a lot about it afterwards. But it was that book that, again, was the book that pushed his career forward. And in the book, he's making the point that creating miracles in our lives is no more complicated than understanding the metaphysics of the universal law, which states that within human beings there lies an immense power, and this power is impartial and unemotional. Now, the cover on the left is the first book that was published, that he published himself, and we're going to look at the chart of that. And the second one on the right there, that's the cover of the Hay House edition of it. If you've got that left-hand one, then that's pretty valuable because there's not many of them left. So this is Stuart's natal chart. He was a sun sign Libra. You'll see his sun sign there, and you'll see the number 0 next to it. So he was born just into the sign of Libra. His ascendant is Virgo, and his moon is in Virgo in the 12th house. This is the date for that first book being released, the 1st of January 83. Now, I don't know it's exactly the 1st of January 83. I do know it was January 83, so ignore where the moon is. I don't know that for sure, but I do know that it was released in January 1983. So we need to consider where the transits are. So he had Mercury conjunct Neptune, so had a vivid imagination. That's in his natal chart. And he was a twin to his sister Dee, who was a Pan's People dancer, and she still dances. So if you're elderly like me and you remember a TV program called Top of the Pops, Dee was part of the dance troupe called Pan's People that danced on Top of the Pops. She actually lives in Wiltshire, which is not far from me, and she has got a YouTube channel. She recently turned 70, so I don't know how much dancing she's still doing. But anyway, that's his sister because he's a twin, and she's older than him by 20 minutes. So he originally self-published this book in 83. Now note the position of Pluto and Saturn. So Pluto is just coming to the end of the sign of Libra. And when he was born, Pluto was in the sign of Leo. So he would have spent an amount of his life under the influence of Pluto. Now it's going sort of further in another direction. I'm not saying that Pluto's a bad planet, it isn't, but if you have a very clustered chart, having a lengthy Pluto transit can seem a little bit as if you're fighting a losing battle, or if you're sort of fighting with the cosmos, depending on what sign of the zodiac you are. If you're Scorpio, it's not going to bother you at all. Saturn is now moving into the sign of Scorpio, and it's exactly going through the section of his chart that's to do with money. So the second house is money, and as you can see, his second house is pretty packed. Ignore Charon. He's got Mars, Jupiter and Venus in his second house of money. Now Pluto's coming along and it's just about to pip into the sign of Scorpio. It's still in Libra, but Saturn's already done it, and Saturn's the planet of responsibility. So he takes the writing of books seriously, and so do the people reading it, because it's a jolly good book. Now it got republished because he sold the rights to Hay House, and this is the date that the book was published, that second one I showed you with the black cover, and that's the 28th of February 2008. Now note Saturn's now transiting through the sign of Virgo, and it will eventually go over his Virgo ascendant, but you'll see at that precise moment in time Saturn's actually retrograding. So it can retrograde for quite an amount of time, but eventually it'll go forwards again. And Saturn's the planet of responsibility. All the other planets, because he's got such a clustered chart, all his other planets are nowhere near anything natally for him. Pluto's working its way through his 4th house, and so is Jupiter. This planet's going through his 5th and his 6th. There's nothing going through his 7th, 8th or 9th, and Mars is now up there in his 10th house of career. So that book did very well, but he didn't like he got a bit sort of cross about the fact that they got the rights to it. So understanding transits help us work with astrological energies to align ourselves with something bigger than ourselves. So I hope that's been helpful for you. And we'll go to any questions. So I've sent you, some of you will have received your charts with the transits on the outside. If you want to make a transit chart on astro.com, you go to astro.com, make sure you go to the page under free horoscopes that's called extended chart selection. And on there you can create a chart and add your transits in. So you've looked at Amy's chart, and I can't quite see what you've said there. Hold on, let me go into the chat. So I'm just going to answer. Go on.
I was just saying that I looked at her charts before, and I've looked at her solar returns, and they're very interesting when you look at all of the different events that happen. So it was cool to see you go through that.
Yeah, there was no time to do all that tonight. She had a very fast life. She was a bit sort of like a firework. There was a lot going on in a short space of time. And don't forget that first album was released when she was 20, and she signed to the first recording company when she was only 19 years old, and they kept it secret because she was so young. I don't know why, but anyway, they did. And yeah. But it was like a little firework. There was a lot going on in a short space of time. So I'm glad you went through the solar returns. Yeah, I'd probably go through them too if I had enough time.
Yeah.
Go on.
I love it. I was saying it was very interesting. And I remember when I was in London, I lived in London in 2011. And I remember I was on the bus going to work. I was working at a design studio, and there was an article that was all about the 27 Club and about her and how the whole quarter life crisis was on the rise in our society. And I thought that was interesting.
Yes, I think you have to really just sort of push yourself until you get your Saturn return. I know everybody sort of talks about Saturn returns, but mine was lovely. I mean, I didn't have a problem with it because I got Saturn natally in Capricorn. But I think if you can sort of just say, I'll wait until my Saturn return, I think Saturn assists us. I think it's so sad when people check out before then. But yeah, not everybody has an astrologist to advise them.
That's right.
So we've got some questions here. So will Aquarius sun stelliums find it difficult with the current Pluto and Aquarius transit? Good question. It won't. The thing about Pluto, it only really does something when it's exactly conjunct something that we have natally. So say, for instance, like I have a sister who is born on the 1st of February. So she's already into the sign of Aquarius. Now, if you're a very, very early Aquarius and you're the 20-something of January, yes, Pluto is now going to be exactly conjunct to your sun sign. So what you need to do is do what the planet suggests, deep change and transformation. What in my life needs to deeply change? Which wasn't a question that anybody had probably asked poor little Amy. You know, nobody had challenge that for her. But it's not going to affect everything in your stellium. You just need to imagine that it'll come along and exactly conjunct something. Okay, so it's now conjunct to my Venus. What do I need to do with my love life? In what way do I need to deeply change it? Now, plenty of people have had Pluto transits and absolute zeros happened because of the nature of whatever their ascendant is and their moon sign, and also the year that they're born and their natal Pluto. So maybe if you were born with natal Pluto in Scorpio, there'll be a square between your sun sign. If you're born in the 80s, you'll probably have Pluto in Scorpio. So already you've got a square in your chart going on. So Pluto's already giving some energies into your chart. So you already know what Pluto feels like. But not everybody lives to have Pluto go through their sign either, because it takes so long to go away through the zodiac. So like I'm living through a Neptune transit. If I'd been born a few years ago, I wouldn't have lived to see it, and I'm really happy that my ruling planet is in my sign because I'm witnessing what's happening. So enjoy your Pluto transit and see if you can get the best from it. Yeah, I hope that helps. Oh, right. Okay. So you put about the solar returns. Thank you. Have I looked at other members of the 27 Club? No, I haven't. I didn't have time. It was only while I was researching this that I read an article in a news item saying that was what had happened in the 27 Club. But maybe that would be for another. I could do a podcast on it probably, or a webinar. Yeah. Okay, so another question. So when reading a chart, is there a general hierarchy for which transit you prioritize as the strongest? Yes. The first one you need to look at is the one that rules the chart. So with that, you'll need to know what your chart rulers are. So each sign of the zodiac has got a planet that looks after it. So the sun rules Leo. Cancer is ruled by the moon. Mercury rules Virgo and Gemini. Venus rules Libra and Taurus, and Mars rules Scorpio. Is an old ruler. The modern one is Pluto and Aries today, and then Jupiter rules Sagittarius, or Sagittarius is Jupiter is the ruler to Sagittarius. Saturn is the ruler to Capricorn, and where am I now? Uranus is the ruler to Aquarius, and so Neptune's the ruler to Pisces, and Pluto is got the Scorpio connection. So whatever the sign of the zodiac is that your chart, mine starts in Leo, so the ruler to my chart is the sun. So I'm constantly watching where the sun is at the moment, which house is it going through. Now when we were looking at Amy's chart, we were looking at which houses things were going through. Okay, I am going to be doing another webinar about just the aspects from something. But in answer to your question, which is the hierarchy? Obviously, the sun and the moon can't do much. Okay, the sun is a bright ball of blumph in the sky and it illuminates things, and the moon is how we feel. So there's never going to be anything negative, and they move too fast for anything to happen. So we need to really be considering the planets Jupiter onwards, because they've got a bit more of a whack. So if we just look at the way that they're listed, so Jupiter's a happy planet anyway, but mind you, too much Jupiter and you'll eat lots of chocolate. But you know, Jupiter retrograde might be something difficult. But keep in mind the hierarchy is the ruler to the chart, and how long is that planet going to spend in that house? The moon's going to be there for a couple of days. You know, Mercury might be there for 3 weeks. So it's all down to individual charts, yeah, and the person's chart that you're looking at. I hope that helps. Let's see if we've got any more questions. I like to think of outer planets like fixed stars. Yeah. Okay, so you've got natal Pluto in Sagittarius, and you feel better that the Pluto in Aquarius won't be too heavy for your Aquarius sun. Will I be doing a webinar on astrocartography for beginners? Yes, I probably can do one of those, do those later in the year. But if you've got natal Pluto in Sag, Pluto in Aquarius is definitely going to benefit you more than Pluto in Capricorn, for sure, because it's in an air sign now. And that's the other thing to keep in mind is the elements, earth, air, fire, water. So water gets along nicely with earth and air gets along nicely with fire. So keep your signs into account as well. And the unfortunate thing with astrology is we not only have to interpret the flipping planet, but we've got 12 signs of the zodiac that they could be in. How to get a headache really quickly. So that's just sort of practice, or reading lots of websites or using lots of different resources to find out the analysis of it. But generally speaking, if we're going to look at somebody's chart and we're going to give them a warning to behave, then absolutely is Saturn and Pluto. If we're going to be considering things like marriage, we need to look at Jupiter and Venus. Yeah. If we're thinking about starting a job, generally it's the sun sign or maybe Saturn. What's going on with that? Yeah. If it's a short-term thing, like when do I go on holiday, then we need to take the sun or moon or Mercury into account. But something long-term is more sort of Saturn and stuff. So think of the energies of each planet to what it's going to do in your chart and whether or not it's going to bring you a boost or not. It can be a drag when Saturn goes past something and then it decides to retrograde again, but normally only does it 3 times. But I'll be discussing that when we do a thing called Transit Rhythmogram in the next webinar, because that gives us a bit more guidance on that. You can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can pop something in the chat. Is the US going through a Pluto return this year? I think the US is Pluto's in Cancer. Is that right? Do you know, Shaheen? I don't know off the top
of my head. I can look it up real quick.
Yeah, I think let's have a look. I know I've got the UK chart. I don't know if I've got US. Let's have a look.
I know there's a couple of different charts, so
oh yes, there is. Let's see what Astro Data Bank gives us.
It's Capricorn. It's well, that's not right. Yeah, it is. It is Capricorn.
Capricorn. Okay, it's had it. Yeah.
27 degrees Capricorn. So
yeah. It's had
now the US has Moon in Aquarius, which is interesting. That'll be interesting with Pluto transiting.
Yeah. We'll see what's going to go on there. That will be very interesting. Let's see if we got any more questions in the chat. Yeah, I think it's 22 to 24, the Pluto return. Yeah. If you want to check a chart that's going to be an accurate chart, there's a website called Astro Data Bank, which is part of astro.com, and on there it was started by a lady called Lois, can't remember her second name, but she started getting accurate information for charts. So a chart won't end up on there unless it's what we call AA accurate. Don't worry. That's fine. Don't worry about the noise. It's okay. I understand that, because it's a bit difficult sometimes to turn things off if you haven't used that bit of software before. Anybody else like to ask anything? Anybody going through a particular transit at the moment they want to talk about, or one they might have had in the past? Because the Saturn return is different from Saturn going past your sun sign. Okay, so my ex-husband ran off with another woman when Saturn was transiting through the sign of Pisces. I'd already had my Saturn return because I got Saturn natally in Capricorn, so it was a little while later that he ran off with somebody else when it went through the sign of Pisces, and now it's going through Pisces again. So I'm remarried and it's not going to happen again. So I'm making sure that you can learn lessons by planets doing something more than once. Oh, that time that happened. What can I do this time to make sure that doesn't happen again? What do I need to be aware of? You know, what self-awareness would be helpful for me? Yeah. So what's the transit to be mindful about a divorce, going through a divorce and finding if it's Saturn? Absolutely. Well, 2 in a way. Saturn, because it's this planet of responsibility, but I'd probably also look at Jupiter, because Jupiter's the sort of lucky planet, and also what's going through which part of your chart, because I've innately in my chart, I've got my sun in Pisces, in the 7th house of close personal relationships. So Saturn came along and went through my 7th house, and I ended up getting divorced because he ran off with another woman who was a lot younger than me. She was 10 years younger than me and slimmer and hadn't had a baby. And so we need to consider the house that the planet's going through. So it's not just the conjunction. In our individual chart, the transit will be going through a particular house. So in my case, Saturn transiting through my 7th, I need to be aware of my partner. Is my partner happy? Am I making sure that they're happy as much as I possibly can? And so in answer to your question, like if you're going through a divorce, so you've got natally Saturn in the 12th house. So Saturn, whatever sign it's in, I don't know. So Saturn in the 12th house won't affect it. So after the worst year of my life last year, I'll come into that one in a minute. But just going back to the going through a divorce, definitely look at Saturn, because you need to take it seriously. So which house is Saturn transiting through for you? Because what you don't want to do is go through a divorce where you end up with no money and he takes the house, or you get the house, or whatever. There needs to be balance to it as well. Yeah, definitely look at Saturn. Worst year of life last year. What would I look at to see why? An astrologer, not you, told me that I didn't have to worry about anything beforehand. Okay, so have a look and see how clustered is your chart. Have you got a really, really clustered chart? You know, what year were you born? What shape is your chart? Because depending on what the shape of your chart is, I've got a splash chart. Okay, so something comes past, it doesn't affect me as much as somebody with a clustered chart. If you've got a clustered chart and something comes past, it's like being under a firing range, yeah. But when you've got a splash chart, it's a little bit, hasn't got the same amount of oomph. And when you say it's the worst year of your life, in what way was it the worst year? Yeah, is it the worst year that you've ever had? Or did it not turn out how you wanted it to be? Maybe you were working towards something and that didn't turn out. So what is it that you could do now? So you need to look and see, maybe if it's your work, that would be the 10th house, what's transiting through there. If it was relationships, what's going through your 7th. If it's creativity, you know, if you're a sun sign Leo, you need to check out your 5th house, because each sign of the zodiac has got different houses that are more important for them. Nothing to enter to the 12th. So is Saturn in the 7th house transit always bad? No, that's a transit. No, it's not always bad, because unless you've got your sun sign located there, okay, it's not a signature for divorce. I got asked this on the Astrological Association transit webinar that we did the other week. It isn't a signature unless your sun sign is there, which is in my case, yeah. And so Saturn going through it hit my sun sign and my Mercury. But if you've got nothing in your 7th house and Saturn's transiting it, just keep in mind that there might be you need to take seriously your relationship in some way, yeah. It's natal in your 8th, but meant to be Saturn until next year. Bit worried. This is 7th next year. Yeah, so just be aware, okay? It's not a signature for divorce, but be aware of that. And also take into account what sun sign you are, yeah? Capricorn should never really worry about Saturn because it's your ruling planet, that type of thing, yeah? So Leo, you've got 6th house sun, yeah, using equal house, but when people used whole sign, it shows 7th house. Oh, okay, yeah, it would be. Yeah, okay. That's the trouble with house systems. We can't make a definitive thing about them if we're doing whole sign. Whole sign, what you can't do with house systems is bounce around with them. You have to use one to make a decision or analysis of something. You can use different house systems to determine different stuff. Okay, but eventually you'll find a house system that suits you and you feel comfortable with. In the Placidus system, my Mercury turns up in the 8th. It just doesn't, I think my sun sign turns up with it. That just doesn't resonate with me. Me. So that's why I've always stuck with equal. So you have to sort of, what does it feel like for you? Yeah. So what does Saturn in the 1st house mean? Your rising sign is Capricorn. Is your rising sign Capricorn? Saturn in your 1st house is happy there. So it means that you take things seriously. If you just have Saturn in your 1st house in a different sign, so I know quite a few people with that, again, Saturn in the 1st house is all about being serious, yeah. I mean, I've got Pluto in my 1st house, and so did Judy for that matter. It's not a desperate signature. But yeah, if something's very near to your ascendant, if we imagine that the ascendant's how you come into the world, how you react when there's a stressful situation, if you've got a planet very near or conjunct your ascendant, that planet will constantly get activated every time you're stressed. So you need to look at being able to calm that planet down. Okay, Saturn transiting the first house. The first house is, in medical astrology, is the head, the face. It's how our view of the world is, how we present ourselves to others. If you haven't got any planets in there, then Saturn's just going through it. You know, it might not be anything going on. There could be quite a lot going on in someone's chart. We can't, and also the other thing, we mustn't just take one planet into account. It's a bit like playing chess. We have to sort of think, where are the other people on the board? You know, where else might I get checkmated or something? So unfortunately, I've made it reasonably easy in this webinar. We're just looking at a couple of things and where things are going, but astrologers will be taking into account quite a lot of other stuff. Yeah, but Saturn transiting through your first house, that's fine. It's not an issue. Just take things, always with Saturn, take stuff seriously. Don't go partying under Saturn too much.
Mary wanted to ask a question, right?
Please.
What advice would you give to someone who's having their second Saturn's return in Pisces?
Second Saturn return, yes?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So they're now in their late 50s, early 60s, late 50s. Okay, so second Saturn return, if you're a female, you're growing into the wise woman. If you're a bloke, you're becoming the elder, but you're becoming elder, ELDER anyway. Okay. Nice to see you, darling Shaheen. Okay, catch you later. Bye-bye now. Saturn return, the second one, is that we're now coming into the sort of the end of our life, or going towards it. So we're nearer to the end than we are to the beginning in a second Saturn return. Now, my mother lived to have a Uranus return. That takes 84 years to go around. In fact, she lived to be 92. She even lived as long as to have a Pluto opposition. I was really excited about the fact she got that. But the second Saturn return is that we're growing into the wise woman. Yeah. And so now we should, if we didn't behave ourselves on our first Saturn return and we were all over the place, we definitely, you're welcome, you definitely have to do it by the time you get to the second one, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, you're welcome. Let's see what we got in the chat. Okay, lovely to see you. Okay, so if no one else has got any more questions, I'm going to stop the recording. So anybody, we're okay. So let me just stop the recording, which I might have done already, did I? Oh, I think I did. So it's been lovely being with you here this evening. Thank you very much for coming along. There'll be another one next month. We're going to look at transit rhythmograms. Okay. The recording will be up on YouTube in a couple of days' time. So nice to see you. Bye-bye now.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, no, oh, just joined.